Combray, Part 6. While I was reading in the garden, a thing my great-aunt would never have understood my doing save on a Sunday, that being the day on which it was unlawful to indulge in any serious occupation, and on which she herself would lay aside her sewing. On a week-day she would have said, "How can you go on amusing yourself with a book? It isn't Sunday, you know," putting into the word amusing an implication of childishness and waste of time. My Aunt Leonie would be gossiping with Françoise until it was time for Eulalie to arrive. She would tell her that she had just seen Madame Goupil go by, without an umbrella, in the silk dress she had made for her the other day at Châteaudun. If she has far to go before vespers, she may get it properly soaked. Very likely, which meant also very likely not, was the answer, for Françoise did not wish definitely to exclude the possibility of a happier alternative. "There, now," went on my aunt, beating her brow, "that reminds me that I never heard if she got to church this morning before the elevation. I must remember to ask Eulalie. Françoise, just look at that black cloud behind the steeple, and how poor the light is on the slates. You may be certain it will rain before the day is out. It couldn't possibly keep on like this. It's been too hot. And the sooner the better, for until the storm breaks my Vichy water won't go down," she concluded, since in her mind the desire to accelerate the digestion of her Vichy water was of infinitely greater importance than her fear of seeing Madame Goupil's new dress ruined. "Very likely." "And you know that when it rains in the square there's none too much shelter." Suddenly my aunt turned pale. "What, 3 o'clock!" she exclaimed. "But vespers will have begun already, and I've forgotten my pepsin. Now I know why that Vichy water has been lying on my stomach." And falling precipitately upon a prayer book bound in purple velvet, with gilt clasps, out of which in her haste she had let fall a shower of the little pictures, each in a lace fringe of yellowish paper, which she used to mark the places of the greater feasts of the church, my aunt, while she swallowed her drops, began at full speed to mutter the words of the sacred text, its meaning being slightly clouded in her brain by the uncertainty whether the pepsin, when taken so long after the Vichy, would still be able to overtake it and to send it down. 3 o'clock! It's unbelievable how time flies. A little tap at the window, as though some missile had struck it, followed by a plentiful falling sound, as light though as if a shower of sand were being sprinkled from a window overhead. Then the fall spread, took on an order, a rhythm, became liquid, loud, drumming, musical, innumerable, universal. It was the rain. "There, Françoise, what did I tell you? How it's coming down! But I think I heard the bell at the garden gate. Go along and see who can be outside in this weather." Françoise went and returned. "It's Madame Amédée, my grandmother. She said she was going for a walk. It's raining hard all the same." "I'm not at all surprised," said my aunt, looking up towards the sky. "I've always said that she was not in the least like other people. Well, I'm glad it's she and not myself who's outside in all this." "Madame Amédée is always the exact opposite of the rest," said Françoise, not unkindly, refraining until she should be alone with the other servants from stating her belief that my grandmother was a bit off her head. "There's benediction over. Eulalie will never come now," sighed my aunt. "It will be the weather that's frightened her away." "But it's not 5 o'clock yet, Madame Octave. It's only 4:30." Only 4:30, and here am I, obliged to draw back the small curtains just to get a tiny streak of daylight at 4:30, only a week before the Rogation days. Ah, my poor Francoise, the dear Lord must be sorely vexed with us. The world is going too far in these days. As my poor Octave used to say, we have forgotten God too often, and He is taking vengeance upon us. A bright flush animated my aunt's cheeks. It was Eulalie. As ill luck would have it, scarcely had she been admitted to the presence when Françoise reappeared, and, with a smile which was meant to indicate her full participation in the pleasure which, she had no doubt, her tidings would give my aunt, articulating each syllable so as to show that, in spite of her having to translate them into indirect speech, she was repeating, as a good servant should, the very words which the new visitor had condescended to use. Françoise said, "His Reverence the Curé would be delighted, enchanted, if Madame Octave is not resting just now, and could see him. His Reverence does not wish to disturb Madame Octave. His Reverence is downstairs. I told him to go into the parlor." Had the truth been known, the curé's visits gave my aunt no such ecstatic pleasure as Françoise supposed, and the air of jubilation with which she felt bound to illuminate her face whenever she had to announce his arrival did not altogether correspond to what was felt by her invalid. The curé, an excellent man, with whom I am sorry now that I did not converse more often, for, even if he cared nothing for the arts, he knew a great many etymologies. The curé, being in the habit of showing distinguished visitors over his church, he had even planned to compile a history of the parish of Combray, used to weary her with his endless explanations, which, incidentally, never varied in the least degree. But when his visit synchronized exactly with Eulalie's, it became frankly distasteful to my aunt. She would have preferred to make the most of Eulalie, and not to have had the whole of her circle about her at one time. But she dared not send the curé away, and had to content herself with making a sign to Eulalie not to leave when he did, so that she might have her to herself for a little after he had gone. "What is this I have been hearing, father, that a painter has set up his easel in your church and is copying one of the windows? Old as I am, I can safely say that I have never even heard of such a thing in all my life. What is the world coming to next, I wonder? And the ugliest thing in the whole church, too." I will not go so far as to say that it is quite the ugliest, for although there are certain things in St. Hilaire which are well worth a visit, there are others that are very old now in my poor basilica, the only one in all the diocese that has never even been restored. The Lord knows our porch is dirty and out of date, still it is of a majestic character. Take, for instance, the Esther tapestries, though personally I would not give a brass farthing for the pair of them, but experts put them next after the ones at Sens. I can quite see, too, that apart from certain details which are, well, a trifle realistic, they show features which testify to a genuine power of observation. But don't talk to me about the windows. Is it common sense, I ask you, to leave up windows which shut out all the daylight, and even confuse the eyes by throwing patches of color, to which I should be hard put to it to give a name, on a floor in which there are not two slabs on the same level? and yet they refuse to renew the floor for me, because, if you please, those are the tombstones of the abbots of Combray and the lords of Guermantes, the old counts, you know, of Brabant, direct ancestors of the present Duc de Guermantes, and of his Duchesse also, since she was a lady of the Guermantes family and married her cousin. My grandmother, whose steady refusal to take any interest in persons had ended in her confusing all their names and titles. My grandmother, whenever anyone mentioned the Duchesse de Guermantes, used to make out that she must be related to Madame de Villeparisis. The whole family would then burst out laughing, and she would attempt to justify herself by harking back to some invitation to a christening or funeral. I feel sure that there was a Guermantes in it somewhere. And for once I would side with the others and against her, refusing to admit that there could be any connection between her school friend and the descendant of Genevieve de Brabant. Look at Roussainville, the curé went on. It is nothing more nowadays than a parish of farmers, though in olden times the place must have had a considerable importance from its trade in felt hats and clocks. I am not certain, by the way, of the etymology of Roussainville. I should dearly like to think that the name was originally Rouville, from Rudolphi Villa, analogous, don't you see, to Chateau Roux, Castrum Rudolphi. But we will talk about that some other time. Very well. The church there has superb windows, almost all quite modern, including that most imposing entry of Louis Philippe into Combray, which would be more in keeping surely at Combray itself, and which is every bit as good, I understand, as the famous windows at Chartres. Only yesterday I met Dr. Persipid's brother, who goes in for these things, and he told me that he looked upon it as a most beautiful piece of work. But, as I said to this artist, who, by the way, seems to be a most civil fellow, and is a regular virtuoso, it appears, with his brush, what on earth, I said to him, do you find so extraordinary in this window, which is, if anything, a little dingier than the rest? I am sure that if you were to ask his lordship, said my aunt in a resigned tone, for she had begun to feel that she was going to be tired, if you were to ask his lordship, he would never refuse you a new window. You may depend upon it, Madame Octave, replied the curé. Why, it was just his lordship himself who started the outcry about the window, by proving that it represented Gilbert the Bad, a lord of Guermantes and a direct descendant of Genevieve de Brabant, who was a daughter of the house of Guermantes, proving that it represented Gilbert the Bad receiving absolution from Saint Hilaire. But I don't see where Saint Hilaire comes in. Why, yes, have you ever noticed in the corner of the window a lady in a yellow robe? Very well, that is Saint Hilaire, who is also known, you will remember, in certain parts of the country as Saint Hilaire, Saint Helier, and even in the Jura, Saint Ely. But these various corruptions of Sanctus Hilarius are by no means the most curious that have occurred in the names of the blessed saints. Take, for example, my good Eulalie, the case of your own patron, Sancta Eulalia. Do you know what she has become in Burgundy? Saint Eloy, nothing more nor less. The lady has become a gentleman. Do you hear that, Eulalie? After you are dead they will make a man of you. Father will always have his joke. Gilbert's brother, Charles the Stammerer, was a pious prince, but having early in life lost his father, Pepin the Mad, who died as a result of his mental infirmity, he wielded the supreme power with all the arrogance of a man who has not been subjected to discipline in his youth, so much so that whenever he saw a man in a town whose face he did not remember, he would massacre the whole place to the last inhabitant. Gilbert, wishing to be avenged on Charles, caused the church at Combray to be burned down. The original church, that was which Theodebert, when he and his court left the country residence he had near there, at Tiree, which is of course Theodeberiacus, to go out and fight the Burgundians, had promised to build over the tomb of Saint Hilaire if the saint brought him victory. Nothing remains of it now but the crypt, into which Theodore has probably taken you, for Gilbert burned all the rest. Finally, he defeated the unlucky Charles with the aid of William, which the curé pronounced Willem, the Conqueror, which is why so many English still come to visit the place. But he does not appear to have managed to win the affection of the people of Combray, for they fell upon him as he was coming out from Mass and cut off his head. Theodore has a little book that he lends people which tells you the whole story. But what is unquestionably the most remarkable thing about our church is the view from the belfry, which is full of grandeur. Certainly in your case, since you are not very strong, I should never recommend you to climb our 97 steps, just half the number they have in the famous cathedral at Milan. It is quite tiring enough for the most active person, especially as you have to go on your hands and knees if you don't wish to crack your skull, and you collect all the cobwebs off the staircase upon your clothes. In any case, you should be well wrapped up, he went on, without noticing my aunt's fury at the mere suggestion that she could ever possibly be capable of climbing into his belfry. You should be wrapped up, for there's a strong breeze there once you get to the top. Some people even assure me that they have felt the chill of death up there. No matter. On Sundays there are always clubs and societies who come, some of them, long distances to admire our beautiful panorama, and they always go home charmed. Wait now. Next Sunday, if the weather holds, you will be sure to find a lot of people there, for Rogation Tide. You must admit, certainly, that the view from up there is like a fairy tale, with what you might call vistas along the plain, which have quite a special charm of their own. On a clear day you can see as far as Verneuil. And then another thing, you can see at the same time places which you are in the habit of seeing one without the other, as, for instance, the course of the Vivonne and the ditches at Saint-Assise-le-Combray, which are separated really by a screen of tall trees. Or, to take another example, there are all the canals at Jouy-le-Vicomte, which is Gaudiacus Vice Commodus, as of course you know. Each time that I have been to Jouy, I have seen a bit of a canal in one place, and then I have turned a corner and seen another. But when I saw the second, I could no longer see the first. I tried in vain to imagine how they lay by one another. It was no good. But from the top of Saint Hilaire, it's quite another matter. The whole countryside is spread out before you like a map, only you cannot make out the water. You would say that there were great rifts in the town, slicing it up so neatly that it looks like a loaf of bread, which still holds together after it has been cut up. To get it all quite perfect, you would have to be in both places at once, up here on the top of Saint Hilaire, and down there at Jouy-le-Vicomte. The curé had so much exhausted my aunt that no sooner had he gone than she was obliged to send away Eulalie also. "Here, my poor Eulalie," she said in a feeble voice, drawing a coin from a small purse which lay ready to her hand. This is just something so that you shall not forget me in your prayers." "Oh, but Madame Octave, I don't think I ought to. You know very well that I don't come here for that." So Eulalie would answer, with the same hesitation and the same embarrassment every Sunday, as though each temptation were the first, and with a look of displeasure which enlivened my aunt and never offended her, for if it so happened that Eulalie, when she took the money, looked a little less sulky than usual, my aunt would remark afterwards, "I cannot think what has come over Eulalie. I gave her just the trifle I always give, and she did not look at all pleased." "I don't think she has very much to complain of, all the same," Françoise would sigh grimly, for she had a tendency to regard as petty cash all that my aunt might give her for herself or her children, and as treasure riotously squandered on a pampered and ungrateful darling, the little coins slipped, Sunday by Sunday, into Eulalie's hand, but so discreetly passed that Françoise never managed to see them. It was not that she wanted to have for herself the money my aunt bestowed on Eulalie. She already enjoyed a sufficiency of all that my aunt possessed, in the knowledge that the wealth of the mistress automatically ennobled and glorified the maid in the eyes of the world, and that she herself was conspicuous and worthy to be praised throughout Combray, Jouy-le-Vicomte, and other cities of men, on account of my aunt's many farms, her frequent and prolonged visits from the curé, and the astonishing number of bottles of Vichy water which she consumed. Françoise was avaricious only for my aunt. Had she had control over my aunt's fortune, which would have more than satisfied her highest ambition, she would have guarded it from the assaults of strangers with a maternal ferocity. She would, however, have seen no great harm in what my aunt, whom she knew to be incurably generous, allowed herself to give away, had she given only to those who were already rich. Perhaps she felt that such persons, not being actually in need of my aunt's presence, could not be suspected of simulating affection for her on that account. Besides, presents offered to persons of great wealth and position, such as Madame Sazerat, Monsieur Swann, Monsieur Legrandin, and Madame Goupil, to persons of the same class as my aunt, and who would naturally mix with her, seemed to Françoise to be included among the ornamental customs of that strange and brilliant life led by rich people, who hunted and shot, gave balls and paid visits, a life which she would contemplate with an admiring smile. But it was by no means the same thing if, for this princely exchange of courtesies, my aunt substituted mere charity, if her beneficiaries were of the class which Françoise would label people like myself, or people no better than myself, people whom she despised even more if they did not address her always as Madame Françoise, just to show that they considered themselves to be not as good. And when she saw that, despite all her warnings, my aunt continued to do exactly as she pleased, and to fling money away with both hands, or so at least Françoise believed, on undeserving objects, she began to find that the presents she herself received from my aunt were very tiny compared to the imaginary riches squandered upon Eulalie. There was not in the neighborhood of Combray a farm of such prosperity and importance that Françoise doubted Eulalie's ability to buy it without thinking twice out of the capital which her visits to my aunt had brought in. It must be added that Eulalie had formed an exactly similar estimate of the vast and secret hoards of Françoise. So every Sunday, after Eulalie had gone, Françoise would mercilessly prophesy her coming downfall. She hated Eulalie, but was at the same time afraid of her, and so felt bound, when Eulalie was there, to look pleasant. But she would make up for that after the other's departure, never, it is true, alluding to her by name, but hinting at her in Sibylline oracles, or in utterances of a comprehensive character, like those of Ecclesiastes the preacher, but so worded that their special application could not escape my aunt. After peering out at the side of the curtain to see whether Eulalie had shut the front door behind her, "Flatterers know how to make themselves welcome and to gather up the crumbs, but have patience, have patience. Our God is a jealous God, and one fine day he will be avenged upon them," she would declaim with the sidelong insinuating glance of Joash, thinking of Athaliah alone when he says that the prosperity of wicked men runs like a torrent past, and soon is spent. But on this memorable afternoon, when the curé had come as well, and by his interminable visit had drained my aunt's strength, Françoise followed Eulalie from the room, saying, "Madame Octave, I will leave you to rest. You look utterly tired out." And my aunt answered her not a word, breathing a sigh so faint that it seemed it must prove her last, and lying there with closed eyes as though already dead. But hardly had Françoise arrived downstairs when 4 peals of a bell, pulled with the utmost violence, reverberated through the house, and my aunt, sitting erect upon her bed, called out, "Has Eulalie gone yet? Would you believe it, I forgot to ask her whether Madame Goupil arrived in church before the elevation. Run after her, quick!" But Françoise returned alone, having failed to overtake Eulalie. "It is most provoking," said my aunt, shaking her head, "the one important thing that I had to ask her." In this way life went by for my Aunt Léonie, always the same in the gentle uniformity of what she called, with a pretence of deprecation, but with a deep tenderness, her little jog-trot. Respected by all and sundry, not merely in her own house, where every one of us, having learned the futility of recommending any healthier mode of life, had become gradually resigned to its observance, but in the village as well, where 3 streets away a tradesman who had to hammer nails into a packing case would send first to Françoise to make sure that my aunt was not resting. Her little jog-trot was, none the less, brutally disturbed on one occasion in this same year. Like a fruit hidden among its leaves, which has grown and ripened unobserved by man until it falls of its own accord, there came upon us one night the kitchen maid's confinement. Her pains were unbearable, and as there was no midwife in Combray, Françoise had to set off before dawn to fetch one from Tiree. My aunt was unable to rest owing to the cries of the girl, and as Françoise, though the distance was nothing, was very late in returning, her services were greatly missed. And so, in the course of the morning, my mother said to me, "Run upstairs and see if your aunt wants anything." I went into the first of her 2 rooms, and through the open door of the other saw my aunt lying on her side, asleep. I could hear her breathing in what was almost distinguishable as a snore. I was just going to slip away, when something, probably the sound of my entry, interrupted her sleep and made it change speed, as they say of motor cars nowadays, for the music of her snore broke off for a second and began again on a lower note. Then she awoke and half turned her face, which I could see for the first time. A kind of horror was imprinted on it. Plainly she had just escaped from some terrifying dream. She could not see me from where she was lying, and I stood there not knowing whether I ought to go forward or to retire. But all at once she seemed to return to a sense of reality, and to grasp the falsehood of the visions that had terrified her. A smile of joy, a pious act of thanksgiving to God, who is pleased to grant that life shall be less cruel than our dreams, feebly illumined her face, and with the habit she had formed of speaking to herself half aloud when she thought herself alone, she murmured, "The Lord be praised! We have nothing to disturb us here but the kitchen maid's baby. And I've been dreaming that my poor Octave had come back to life and was trying to make me take a walk every day." She stretched out a hand towards her rosary, which was lying on the small table, but sleep was once again getting the mastery and did not leave her the strength to reach it. She fell asleep, calm and contented, and I crept out of the room on tiptoe, without either her or anyone's else ever knowing from that day to this what I had seen and heard. When I say that, apart from such rare happenings as this confinement, my aunt's little jog-trot never underwent any variation, I do not include those variations which, repeated at regular intervals and in identical form, did no more really than print a sort of uniform pattern upon the greater uniformity of her life. So, for instance, every Saturday, as Françoise had to go in the afternoon to market at Roussainville-le-Pont, the whole household would have to have luncheon an hour earlier, and my aunt had so thoroughly acquired the habit of this weekly exception to her general habits that she clung to it as much as to the rest. She was so well routined to it, as Françoise would say, that if, on a Saturday, she had had to wait for her luncheon until the regular hour, it would have upset her as much as if she had had on an ordinary day to put her luncheon forward to its Saturday time. Incidentally, this acceleration of luncheon gave Saturday, for all of us, an individual character, kindly and rather attractive. At the moment when, ordinarily, there was still an hour to be lived through before meal-time sounded, we would all know that in a few seconds we should see the endives make their precocious appearance, followed by the special favor of an omelette, an unmerited steak. The return of this asymmetrical Saturday was one of those petty occurrences, intramural, localized, almost civic, which, in uneventful lives and stable orders of society, create a kind of national unity, and become the favorite theme for conversation, for pleasantries, for anecdotes which can be embroidered as the narrator pleases. It would have provided a nucleus ready-made for a legendary cycle if any of us had had the epic mind. At daybreak, before we were dressed, without rhyme or reason, save for the pleasure of proving the strength of our solidarity, we would call to one another, good-humoredly, cordially, patriotically, "Hurry up! There's no time to be lost! Don't forget it's Saturday!" While my aunt, gossiping with Françoise and reflecting that the day would be even longer than usual, would say, "You might cook them a nice bit of veal, seeing that it's Saturday." If, at 10:30, someone absent-mindedly pulled out a watch and said, "I say, an hour and a half still before luncheon," everyone else would be in ecstasies over being able to retort at once, "Why, what are you thinking about? Have you forgotten that it's Saturday?" And a quarter of an hour later we would still be laughing and reminding ourselves to go up and tell Aunt Léonie about this absurd mistake to amuse her. The very face of the sky appeared to undergo a change. After luncheon the sun, conscious that it was Saturday, would blaze an hour longer in the zenith, and when someone, thinking that we were late in starting for our walk, said, "What, only 2 o'clock?" feeling the heavy throb go by him of the twin strokes from the steeple of Saint Hilaire, which, as a rule, passed no one at that hour upon the highways, deserted for the midday meal, or for the nap which follows it, or on the banks of the bright and ever-flowing stream, which even the angler had abandoned, and so slipped unaccompanied into the vacant sky, where only a few loitering clouds remained to greet them. If someone said that it was only 2 o'clock, the whole family would respond in chorus, "Why, you're forgetting. We had luncheon an hour earlier. You know very well it's Saturday." The surprise of a barbarian, for so we termed everyone who was not acquainted with Saturday's special customs, who had called at 11 o'clock to speak to my father, and had found us at table, was an event which used to cause Francoise as much merriment as perhaps anything that had ever happened in her life. And if she found it amusing that the nonplussed visitor should not have known beforehand that we had our luncheon an hour earlier on Saturday, it was still more irresistibly funny that my father himself, fully as she sympathized from the bottom of her heart with the rigid chauvinism which prompted him, it was still irresistibly funny that my father should never have dreamed that the barbarian could fail to be aware of so simple a matter, and so had replied, with no further enlightenment of the other's surprise at seeing us already in the dining-room, "You see, it's Saturday." On reaching this point in the story, Francoise would pause to wipe the tears of merriment from her eyes, and then, to add to her own enjoyment, would prolong the dialogue, inventing a further reply for the visitor to whom the word Saturday had conveyed nothing. And so far from our objecting to these interpolations, we would feel that the story was not yet long enough, and would rally her with, "Oh, but surely he said something else as well. There was more than that the first time you told it." My great aunt herself would lay aside her work, and raise her head, and look on at us over her glasses.